Is it better to have a positively geared property versus a negatively geared property when we're trying to retire with real estate? In this video, I'm going to talk to you about the strategy around when it's better to have a positive portfolio and then when it's better to have a negative portfolio. If you're interested, then definitely keep watching. Hey guys, my name's Ravi and welcome back to Personal Finance with Ravi Sharma. If you're new here, smash that subscribe button because I talk about real estate, cryptocurrency, and financial freedom. Now this might be the first time you're actually seeing my face pop up on YouTube. So the biggest reason why you should probably follow me is because I run one of Australia's fastest growing buyers agencies. We've won a couple of awards. You should definitely go check out the page if you're interested in getting help to move at speed when getting into the real estate game. If you're interested in building a portfolio, then definitely book a free call. I'll leave a link in the description below. Now with the rising interest rates, right now it is almost impossible to get a positively geared property if you're financing at 90% LVR. Now if you go out there and say have a 30 or 40% deposit, then you might find yourself in a position where you might be positively geared. But you might also be someone who's purchased a property 5 or 10 years ago and now your rents have continued to climb up, but your debt isn't that large and you may have even fixed it at rates that were really low before. So then you might be in a position where you're positively geared. Now let's figure out what the two are, because you might get to this point of the video and be like, okay, I don't think I really understand positive gearing, negative gearing, and then higher rental yield. So let's just break it down. Let's break it down in the most simple way possible. Positive gearing essentially means that when you've purchased a property, the cost of holding this property is taken care of by the property's rental income. So if your investment property is renting for $500 a week, but your costs work out to be $450 a week, then you're in a position where it's $50 positive. Now that you understand what positive is, negative is the opposite. When I was in year 11 in economics class, we spent 9 out of the 10 weeks in that term learning about demand, right? So economics is demand and supply. So I'm thinking, well, it would make sense to spend 5 weeks on demand and then 5 weeks on supply, right? But this economics teacher was like, no, just trust me, we're just gonna learn demand. So we get to week 7, week 8, week 9, and I had to ask him. I was like, look, the exams are in 2 weeks. I have no idea what supply is, and all you've been talking about for 9 weeks is demand. So when are we gonna learn supply? And he goes, well, it's your lucky day because today is the actual day we're gonna learn about supply. I said, all right, cool. So I get out there and I'm like, okay, this I expect is gonna be a complete cram session because we have to do what, 9 weeks worth of work in like 5 days? And he turns around and he goes, supply is simply the opposite of demand. Everything that you've learned about demand, just think the opposite. And I thought, this guy's actually a genius. Some in the class thought he was an idiot, but I thought he was a genius and it worked out. So every time I thought it was one thing, but it was the other. Now I digress. Now in this case, what we have is negatively geared properties are the opposite. So if we have our property renting for $500 a week, but our expenses to hold that property is $550 a week, then it would be negatively geared. Now, when is one better than the other? Is one gonna help us retire earlier? Well, on the surface, you might say, well, I just wanna replace my income. And so in order for me to do that, all I need to do is get, say, $80,000 worth of income from my properties. And that is 100% true. Because if you said, I have one property that generates 20K a year after all my expenses, I just need 4 of those and I retired. However, it goes deeper than that. When you're starting to build out a portfolio, people often chase yield. And they say, okay, well, as long as the yield is high, I can go and retire as quickly as possible. And I know some people have been following me for 4 years on the YouTube channel and have said, well, you only focus on cash flow, you don't focus on capital growth. And I said, no, I don't. The yield or the cash flow is actually just a bonus. What you want is really you want capital growth, and then the yield or the cash flow allows you to stay in the game. So for any of the OG followers, you would know that I often say the cash flow keeps you in the game, capital growth gets you out of the game. And what game I'm talking about is the game of life. It's getting real philosophical here today. But what I'm actually referring to is actually being able to retire. And what you need is a combination of both. It doesn't matter who you talk to, it really comes down to what your goals are and how you're gonna execute them. You might go, well, look, I don't care about capital growth. All I want is the rental income so I can retire. So if we use the example of replacing an $80,000 income, we need 4 properties giving us $20,000 each. Okay, seems fair. But when you go to buy these 4 properties, you're gonna need a deposit and you're gonna need the borrowing capacity. And that's where cash flow and capital growth play a part. Because let's say, for instance, you need a deposit for your second, third, and fourth property. You might have enough for the first property, but where are you gonna get the second one? And if you have to save another $60,000, $70,000, $80,000, it might take you a couple of years to get there. And that means this idea of getting to the $80,000 number is actually moving further and further away. Because we all know that if property prices continue to rise, you might not be able to retire when you want to. So in this case, you're out of the market for 3 years because you're trying to save your money, and you bought in, say, a rural town or mining town in the hope that the yield is going to allow you to retire early. Now let's just flip this conversation around. If you say happen to go for a property that was neutral or slightly negative, yet had capital growth of 5, 6, 7%, then you'd be in a position where you could get your next deposit for your second property a lot sooner. Because the property is growing in wealth, you've got the equity there, and that equity then acts as a deposit for your second property. I illustrate this perfectly and so simply in this video, so definitely go check it out. I actually show how you can retire on just 2 properties, so definitely go check out that video. So that's where capital growth really plays a part, because if I can buy one property and that one property keeps going higher, I can use the equity on that one to purchase second property, third property, and fourth property. Now, if I've taken a balanced approach, I might find that I've purchased all 4 properties a lot sooner than if I simply focused on the yield. Now, you might be at this point thinking, well, it sounds like capital growth is the way to go, so why don't I just focus completely on that? And that's where the borrowing capacity argument comes in. Because if you're in a position where you can actually borrow for one property, that's fantastic. But if that one property is negatively geared by a lot, it reduces your borrowing capacity significantly. And so what happens is the bank will say, yeah, you have the deposit, you have the equity, but you just can't access that. And you cannot purchase another property because we're not ready to give you out the debt, because based on our calculators, you can't afford it. So if you had strong cash flow, it may not increase your borrowing capacity, but it doesn't negatively impact it as much if your property is in a position of neutral or slightly negative versus being super negative by $20,000, $30,000, which is most likely the case for most people who've bought in Sydney with a yield of maybe 2 or 3%. So just to recap, we know that we need both cash flow and capital growth to be able to grow a portfolio. Some may come into the comment section and say, well, you can't get cash flow and you can't get capital growth on the same property. And although this is an age-old argument, it's because of the information that we got taught back over the last 10, 15 years. If you look at a data-driven approach, that's where the numbers don't lie. As I've said on the channel, men and women lie, but data does not lie. And that is why it's your friend. And that's why you need to trust the data that you see and match that up with what's happening on the ground floor. Now, ultimately, if you're positively geared, it's important to know that you're generating an income after those expenses. That means you're going to get taxed. And this is something that some people don't realize till after the fact. And to me, it seems like it's pretty logical. Let's say you go to your job and you earn a salary. Well, on that salary, you get taxed because it's income. Now, if I go and do that with a property, and I treat property like a business, so I go out and say, okay, I'm going to accumulate more assets and now I'm making more income, that income is going to be taxed. Like, we need to all be aware of that. Now, the flip side to this, and accountants are going to love this, they will often say, just go for a property that is negatively geared, you're getting your taxes too high, we need to reduce those taxes. Let me just pause here for a second, because if you're an accountant watching this, or you're someone who's had this advice come from their accountant, it is the dumbest advice ever. And I'll tell you why. Because you don't simply go and acquire property to reduce taxes. You go to acquire property to increase wealth. And if that means that it's going to help reduce taxes or it's going to increase my taxes afterwards, that's a byproduct of what you're trying to do. Now, capital growth, you're not going to pay tax on. If you go out there, make some equity and it comes out to purchase another property, you're not getting taxed on that. And I talk about it in detail in this video, so definitely go check it out after this one. But if you are negatively geared, you'll be able to reduce your taxable income for that year, which means effectively you could get some money back in taxes. Now, to illustrate this point and why I think it is the dumbest advice you're going to get is because you're effectively saying, I'm going to buy a property. I don't really care if it goes up, like I would ideally like it to, because we all live in a perfect world. I would ideally like this property to grow in wealth, but the real reason I bought this is so I can reduce my taxes. Now, in order for me to reduce my taxes, I've effectively got to say, I'm willing to spend $1 so that I can save 55 cents or 45 cents or 37 cents, depending on what you're actually getting taxed. Just think about that. Now, the flip side to it will also make a lot of sense to you. You're saying, I don't want to make an extra dollar, so I don't want to be positively geared. I don't want to make that extra dollar because I'm going to have to pay taxes. And that might be 30%, it might be 45%, but I don't want to make that dollar. Guess what? You still get to keep at least 55 cents on that dollar. And that is how the rich are getting richer, because they understand that at some point, if I buy a property today and the rents continue going higher and my debt pretty much stays the same, it's going to eventually turn positive anyway. So if you want to go down the path of reducing your taxes, good luck to you. You're probably not going to make it. But if you're going out there and picking the right areas, the right location, and one goal in mind, which is how do I increase my wealth and increase the value of my assets, you are going to do really, really well financially over the next 20 years. If you need any help at all, definitely do reach out. If you've enjoyed this video, smash that like button and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Thanks, guys.